let's start. Today we do it in English. Yesterday we had a German, Serbian with a bit of English communication. Today we are doing our lecture in English. Dear friends and colleagues, thank you for coming. And I'm glad also that beside our today's guests, we also have our former lecturers. We are going internationally, as you would say. I'm glad that Professor Umutuze, who was in January, is with us again, and Professor Evangelos Protopapadakis and Despina from Greece, who were in, when was it, February, I think, the same time, more or less. And after all, I'm glad that finally at our institute I can present you my even friend for some years, colleague Andreas Kinneging, who is a professor at Leiden University, teaching legal philosophy, but also political theory and political thought generally. And I could speak for quite a long about him. He's really very well known professor European, if I may say. We met each other at the Center for European Renewal, so-called Brandenburg meetings, which is really gathering kind of the most influential and the most interesting conservative intellectuals in Europe and America nowadays, starting from Roger Scruton, Remy Bragg, Richard Legutko, and so on and so on, and in which really Andreas is one of the driving forces and somebody who's really investing so much of energy and spirit in the development of political and conservative thought as well. He is involved in many of the things, including we spoke yesterday, the project of Paris Charter, if I may say, which he didn't sign, but was one of the people who was working on that, and so on and so on. Today we arranged, actually yesterday was a very interesting lecture about the critique of the modern perception of the world and let me say from a conservative point of view. And today I asked him to really introduce us into something we really didn't have opportunity, as far as I know, to speak about not only the Institute but generally. I told him that several of the books of Leo Strauss have been translated already in the 80s and beginning of the 90s, but the reception is almost non-existent. Leo Strauss is, as some of you know, one of the most interesting political figure for some, and not so small amount of people. He's treated as maybe the most influential and one of the best political thinkers of the 20th century. And unfortunately, we didn't grab anything of this kind of debates and development, and that's why I asked Andreas to give us a presentation of political theory and political thought of Leo Strauss here. Andreas, thank you very much. And before you start, we have some small present for you. Since we took just a couple of hours to show you some of Belgrade, this is to have it for a little bit of investigation, and it's very modest. It's called Belgrade Eternal City. You know, we are very modest people, so this is not present for you from the Institute. Okay.
I thought Rome was the Eternal City. But
Yeah. No.
I now know better.
17 Roman emperors were born here, so
we are much more Roman than they are. No more with the jokes, and after all, we have people coming from two important empires, so we should not mock too much with that. Finally, I give you the floor, and I really hope that you're going to enjoy in the debate after that as well. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Misha. Thank you very much for being here. Misha has dragged me around town for the whole morning, so that means that I'm exhausted. So if I'm slightly incoherent, it's his fault. Let me put on my glasses. You know, old man needs 2 pairs of glasses, as you know. Okay, I'm going to speak about Leo Strauss. Who is Leo Strauss? Strauss was born in 1899 in Germany and died in 1973 in the USA, as you all know. And he could be called one of the many intellectuals that are sometimes named Hitler's gift to America. You know the expression. many natural scientists, most prominently Albert Einstein, of course, novelists and poets like the brothers Mann, but also philosophers, Arendt, Kelsen, Voegelin, Horkheimer and Adorno, Hayek and Mises, etc., etc., fled to America upon Hitler's ascent to power, or shortly after, or even before. And so did Leo Strauss. Now, what does he stand for? What are his concerns? What is his position? What does he want to say? That's what I want to talk about today. And it seems to me that that is not clear at first sight for anyone who somehow starts to be interested in Strauss and order some more of his books, or what most people do nowadays. They read the Wikipedia page in several languages. Then you get a sort of vague impression, rather unclear. So what's the man, what's he talking about? What is he about? He says things about tension between philosophy and politics. He says things about esoteric way of writing. He speaks about medieval Jewish and Arab philosophy, and he's clearly into Plato. He writes about Thucydides. He's even written a book about Aristophanes. So he seems to be sort of, how do you say, jack of all trades, right? It's sort of difficult to point where the man is going. Now I want to talk exactly about that. So what's at the core, at the heart of Strauss's thinking. And leave out most of the rest, or just say it sort of tangentially, so on the side. In my view, one could say, well, there's different ways of putting this, but one way of putting it is that is saying that his work revolves around the problem of nihilism. So the notion of nihilism is central to his thought, his work. So we have to discuss the idea, the concept of nihilism. Now, very often, also with us, ourselves, if you look back over a lifetime of work, it's often the case that your main interests and the problems you're really interested in were already there at the very start of your career, at the very start of your thinking, as a student or as a PhD candidate. Now that goes for Strauss too. It is possible to already see the roots of Strauss's thinking, the roots of his life concerns as a scholar in his earliest publications. Now let me pick one out. I think the most important one, which is Strauss's doctoral dissertation from 1921. He was 22 at the time. Written in Hamburg under Ernst Cassirer, whom you know. I will return to that later. And it's called Das Erkenntnisproblem in der philosophischen Lehre Friedrich Heinrich Jacobis. So it's about Jacobi. Now for those who do not know Jacobi, Friedrich Heinrich Jacobi, 1743-1819, was one of the founders of the German opposition to Enlightenment thinking. And he was the one who popularized the term nihilism. He seems not to have been the inventor of the term. There was another German philosopher of the 18th century. But Jacobi was the one who turned it into, well, a household name would be too much, of course, but into a word popular amongst philosophers, amongst thinkers. And and for him, for Jacobi, nihilism meant was something attached to the Enlightenment. In fact, it was the prime fault of Enlightenment thinking in Jacobi's mind, which could be summarized as follows. Jacobi thinks that rationalism / secularism leads to egoism and moral relativism, and the two together, egoism and moral relativism, equal nihilism. And he opposed that with the idea that we need Glaube, faith, or i.e. revelation, i.e. absolute standards to counter that nihilism, which is consequence of, or even implicit in the Enlightenment. Now, it's very interesting, of course, that even at this very early age, Strauss seems to be interested in precisely this problem, this theme that is still our problem and our theme. Strauss must have come to that issue very early. He was from a rather orthodox Jewish family, and but he must have read Nietzsche already at his Gymnasium Filipinum in Marburg, famous gymnasium of that day. Nietzsche, of course, who, as you know, called the Judeo-Christian faith the result of a dishonest and hypocritical turning upside down of all true goodness by priests full of resentment. Well, you've read the genealogy of morals, so you know everything about it. And of course, Nietzsche himself was a son of a preacher. Now, and Nietzsche also used the notion of nihilism, but of course in a very, very, very different sense. For Nietzsche, nihilism is the same as Christian belief in the afterlife, as the true life, which, by the way, he thought was inspired by Plato and the Platonic theory of ideas. So, according to Nietzsche, everyone who is a Christian or a Platonist and hence believe that true being is not the being here and now, in the flux, so to speak, between coming into existence and being destroyed, is a nihilist, because all there is this life, this temporary life, this spatial life. There is no afterlife. Life is all we have. So Christianity and Platonism are nihilistic. That was Nietzsche's concept. Now, so you have Jacobi's concept, Christian concept of nihilism as well. Enlightenment thinking. Precisely the thinking that all there is this world and this life between birth and death. That's nihilism. And then you have Nietzsche, who also speaks about nihilism, but in the opposite sense, right? And these are, of course, Strauss, coming from an Orthodox Jewish family, would would sympathize on the one hand with Jacobi's position, but on the other hand, as a young man going to the Gymnasium Filipino, was extremely interested in Nietzsche, was captured by Nietzsche, obsessed even with Nietzsche, as he later confessed, and so felt sort of caught in between these views of what was happening. So to summarize, Strauss is on the one hand strongly drawn to Nietzsche, but on the other hand, he also felt or saw the great value of religion. Hence his problem. What exactly is true nihilism? And is it right? Is it the true who is right? Is Jacobi right or is Nietzsche right? How should I see the Enlightenment? As something good? Is it true that there is nothing more than this life? Or is Jacobi right? And is the rejection of Christianity and of the transcendent in general a rejection of every morality, every absolute standard? Does it lead to relativism and hence to complete nihilism? Now, we understand that problem, and what is more, as I said, it is still our problem. Indeed, in my view, it is our biggest problem, and hence Strauss's supreme relevance. In my view, Strauss, together with Erik Vögelin, one of the other refugees from Germany, or from Austria in that case, is the most important political philosopher of the 20th century. And it would be a great help if more of us at the university and also outside the university perhaps would study him. All right. This problem of nihilism, as I have phrased it, can also be put in various other ways. We could speak of it as the problem of reason versus revelation, right? And that is a dichotomy Strauss himself often uses, but it's not a very clear way of putting the problem. Because, what's revelation, what's reason? As you know, the churches, Christian faith, the Jewish faith too, often extol reason. The beginning of the Gospel of St. John is, the first sentence is famously about the Logos. And the Logos may mean Christ, it does mean Christ, but Logos also means reason. And on the other hand, the so-called side of reason, from the age of reason, so the side of the Enlightenment, that side often consciously limits the powers of reason. We'll think only of the philosophy of Hume or Kant. They do many things, but one of their main aims is to limit the aspirations of reason. Reason can do very little. So I would suggest a better way of putting what Strauss is really about. I would say his thought is about tradition versus modernity. It's a return to the querelle des anciens et des modernes, which, as you know, started in the 17th century and was discussed mainly in France and England, Scotland, Britain, which I should say, but also in Germany and some other countries. So Strauss is really about the European tradition, i.e. The Jewish, so to speak, the Christian faith with its Jewish background, and Greek philosophy, meaning not the Stoics or the Epicureans or whatever, no, meaning Plato and Aristotle. Because the Greek philosophy in our European tradition was not so much about these secondary thinkers, secondary schools. Even if, according to these schools themselves, they were dependent on Plato and Aristotle. Right, like, for instance, Plotinus considered himself to be a true blue Platonist, with a little bit of Aristotle. So we are talking about tradition versus modernity. Let's go back for a moment to Strauss's background. As I told you already, he went to school in Marburg, not far from his hometown, Kirchheim, which is a small town in Hessen. And in the Marburg at the time was not only the location of this Gymnasium Philippinum, but also the location of a famous university, as it still is, very, very beautiful buildings. Of course, the level has gone down tremendously. At that time, the Marburg University was famous for the so-called Marburg Schule, of which Hermann Cohen was the most important representative. Now this Marburg Schule is famous for being a Kantian Schule, Neo-Kantian Schule, Neo-Kantian school. Cohen was still alive when Strauss went to the Gymnasium in 1912. Cohen lived from 1842 to 1918. So Cohen still walked the streets of Marburg. And of course Cohen was Kantian and he was also Jewish, like Strauss. So this must have made a great impression on him. You can be Jewish and a Kantian. But of course Kant is modern. Kant is absolutely anti-tradition. Now that explains why Strauss, when he had finished the gymnasium and went to the university, Strauss died at that very moment. Cohen died. Cohen had died at that moment. And so Strauss went to Hamburg, because in Hamburg there was another the other famous neo-Kantian, namely Ernst Cassirer. He studied with Cassirer and then wrote his dissertation on Jacobi. Interesting. So Kantianism must have drawn him very much. Now Kant, as I told you, is a modern. He's anti-tradition. He's clearly an Enlightenment thinker, but he's not a standard Enlightenment thinker like Hobbes and Locke and well, the French like Voltaire or Diderot or Helvetius or Bentham. No, Kant is a critic of the standard Enlightenment, which you could summarize as utilitarian, the doctrine of utilitarian happiness. Die Glückseligkeitslehre is Kant's word for it. And he rejects it, as you know. So what exactly is Kant's position? Kant takes up elements of the tradition, but he radically transforms and modernizes them. Let me give you just two examples. His categorical imperative is clearly secularized and generalized variety of the Ten Commandments. Right, the unconditional commandment, that's the categorical imperative. Now his transcendental or noumenal reality is clearly a secularized, individualized variety of transcendent reality, the transcendent reality of the tradition. However, it would be wrong to see Kant as aiming at a synthesis of some kind between tradition and modernity. Because in fact he is even more radical than the standard Enlightenment. For at least the standard Enlightenment still embraced the idea of, for instance, an objective human nature. And in Kant, all that connection to objectivity, so to speak, also to an objective human nature is lost. So in Kant we have a radical modernity, even more radical than the British and the French Enlightenment. And the same goes, of course, for Hegel and Nietzsche, who are also often falsely seen as backward-looking. Let me just, because I have to move on and say more about Strauss, I would just like to refer you to the last chapter of the Phenomenology of Spirit, which is totally Christianity, totally immanentized, of course. Christianity is seen as the utmost alienation. And then let me refer to Nietzsche's secularized view of Homer, totally secularized view of Homer, which is as an ideal. So the Homeric heroes in Nietzsche are an ideal, but the Homeric heroes without the gods, so to speak. Which of course is very, very modern, extremely modern. It's even more modern than the standard Enlightenment view, criticized by both Hegel and Nietzsche. So why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this to sketch the background, the intellectual background of Strauss. So the intellectual influences that shaped his thinking. So what we have, on the one hand, is Marburg and Hamburg, representing modernity, even extreme modernity. And Kirchheim, on the other hand, his birthplace and the place where his family lived, which symbolizes for him the tradition. Now, there's one more element I have to add. So here you have Strauss, a very young man, drawn between two sort of poles, tradition and modernity. He studies Marburg, then Hamburg. But this other side doesn't, there's doubt. There's doubt about modernity. And that's the background of that is his own family. Now, what does he do after finishing his dissertation? In 1923, Heidegger comes to Marburg on the invitation of Nicola Hartmann and others. And Strauss takes his classes. Now Heidegger, of course, is in an important sense anti-modern. Although his anti-modernism is of a unique kind, so to say, because he includes all of Western thinking, going back to Plato, in modernity, as you know. Technological thinking, modern technological thinking, eidetic thinking, thinking about das Sein, this starts with Plato. And there we go wrong, so we have to go back before Plato. Right? That's what Arendt is, where Arendt is following him later in life, in the human condition and so on. Now, Heidegger must have been an extremely talented teacher, and Strauss was extremely impressed by Heidegger. We know that because he said so on several occasions, and because it is clear that throughout his life he remained in discussion with Heidegger. So you have Neo-Kantianism on the one hand, and you have Judaism and Heideggerianism on the other hand. I would say Heidegger tries to rethink Christianity after the death of God. So now, if all that is true, then it becomes understandable that Strauss's first great book is on Spinoza. Die Religionskritik Spinozas als Grundlage seiner Bibelwissenschaft. There you have the two elements, right? 1930, he was in his late 20s. So in Spinoza, this Jewish atheist, or maybe he was God intoxicated, like Novalis said. Like, it's a very interesting figure for him to study. Like a sort of kindred soul. In Spinoza, in his Spinoza book, he was looking for the answer to the question: is the modern view the correct view? Is it true, or is it not true? Now, Spinoza led him on to Hobbes. Once you study Spinoza and you begin to understand the modernity of Spinoza, you necessarily return to Hobbes, who was one generation before, and is the more radical founder of modernity. So his second book, also very understandable, is on Hobbes, which was his first book published in English from a German manuscript in 1936. I'll tell you a bit more about the English in a moment. So Spinoza and Hobbes, two modern thinkers. At the same time, Strauss studies the tradition. To begin with, of course, the Jewish tradition. That's his background. Now, who do you study when you want to study the Jewish philosophical tradition? Well, there's only one man you can start with. That's Maimonides. That's Rambam. And that's exactly what he does. Now, Maimonides brings him back to the Arab philosophers of the Middle Ages, especially Al-Farabi. And Al-Farabi, of course, brings him back to Strauss, to Aristotle, and in particular Plato, who he found out was the true founder of the tradition. Now, then we are around the beginning of the Second World War, around 1940 or so, end of the 30s. In any case, a couple of years after his Hobbes book, that Strauss must have come into his own, must have come to his final mature views. It's not coincidence that Strauss never wanted his Hobbes book or his Spinoza book to be republished, because he considered them to be useful trials. Now, so around the beginning of the World War, around 1940, he came into his own and come to his final mature views. Where do we find them expressed? Well, we find them expressed in the books and the articles written in America, where Strauss had fled to escape from Hitler. So anything from after the Hobbes book is the adult, the final Strauss. Now, the most important of these writings is clearly Natural Right and History, which is from 1953. And interestingly, I say that as a side remark, a reworking of the Walgreen lectures, which also includes Arendt's Human Condition a couple of years later, and Voegelin's New Science of Politics. Right? Three tremendously important books. Now, this Natural Right and History is, as I said, is magnum opus. All the works after Natural Right and History deepen and elaborate the view expounded here. His basic conceptions do not change anymore. So what I will do in the rest of my presentation is focus on Natural Right and History and give you a short summary or analysis of that. But before I do that, one or two last biographical elements need to be added. First of all, the element of totalitarianism. You cannot, there are many people who do that, strange enough. Especially Americans. I understand why, but you cannot forget, you can never forget that Strauss was German and Jewish, and that he fled from the Nazis to the US, and that World War II, the most important crime committed in World War II is the attempted genocide of the Jews of Europe. That is Strauss's own people. It's obvious that event is central to Strauss's life, and there is a connection with the question of modernity, in the sense that the genocide on the Jews for Strauss adds a new poignancy to the question of modernity. That is to say, is there a link between the Holocaust and modernity, right? Or is it coincidental? Does modernity have something to do with the Holocaust, with the genocide on the Jews? But let's not forget that Strauss that the 50s and the 60s were not, a period in which Nazism was central to the minds of academics. No, it was the other totalitarianism that was central to the minds of the academics, and hence also played a role in Strauss's thinking, namely communism. The USSR, as of 1917, and the Warsaw Pact, the fact that communism has conquered half of Europe, including half of Germany after 45. So that too became an important aspect of the issue, right? It's not only modernity and Nazism related, but also what's the relationship between modernity and communism. Okay. Now, the standard view today, I think, and the standard view for a long time already, is the following. Modernity, i.e. Enlightenment thinking, is true and good. It's a great improvement upon the tradition, be it philosophy, Christianity and so on, which was wrong and immoral. And so the fact that we have overcome, that we are in the process, final steps of the process of overcoming the tradition, is fantastic. It's good riddance. We live in the morning of a new day, right? We have to be very happy that we are no longer forced to learn Greek and Latin in school and read Plato and Aristotle because it's all bullshit. And of course Christianity is even greater bullshit. But it's no longer there, and we are no longer bothered with it. So, yes, the new age and the new man are rising now. Freedom, equality, etc. That, I think, is the dominant view. Probably also in Serbia now, but especially in the western part of Europe and in the US. Now, before I go into natural history, let us ask ourselves, from this dominant perspective, how does totalitarianism, both communist and Nazi, appear? So, what's the dominant view of totalitarianism? Well, totalitarianism is a wrong turn at some point. It's where somehow modernity took a wrong turn. But the good news is that, according to the dominant view, right, totalitarianism is not at all inherent in modernity. It has nothing to do with the core or the essence of modernity. That is to say, it's not unavoidable, it's not the end stadium of modernity, and it's not a likely consequence of modernity, it's just some mistake, something went wrong. And probably even because there were remnants of the tradition somewhere. Right? We can discuss that afterwards if you like. But I'm trying to sketch some of the main outlines of the dominant view of modernity as a good thing, and then the problem of totalitarianism. Well, okay, sort of a mistake, but it's nothing inherent in modernity, so let's just forget about it. The real good modernity, still the dominant view, is based on Enlightenment ideas, i.e. freedom and equality, which lead to a market economy, democracy and the rule of law, prosperity, tolerance, etc., i.e. to a society in which everyone is free to do as he likes as long as he respects the equal liberty of all others. And technology in this view appears as something good, supportive of all these good things. You recognize the view? Okay. If you want names with it, well, Popper is of course a famous proponent, and also, from a somewhat different perspective, Friedrich von Hayek. Who is also a progressivist and a modernist. Now, I've said enough about the context. Now we have to go into Strauss. Strauss's views are very different. The main thing is this: he's extremely critical of modernity. Modernity is in essence nihilistic. And there is an essential connection between modernity and totalitarianism, of a kind. There's several kinds possible, but modernity and totalitarianism are not just two, different things that, well, occurred once at the same time but have nothing to do with each other. No, they are essentially related. So Strauss defends the Strauss' work is in essence a defense of the tradition against modernity. Now, let's take a closer look at natural right history. Natural right history starts with a description of the main tenets of modernity in the first two chapters. Strauss says that modernity is not one thing. Modernity is really two things. There are two modernities, so to speak. There is, in my words, not his words, on the one hand Romanticism, and on the other hand Enlightenment thinking. Romanticism is the topic of chapter 1, and the Enlightenment is the topic of chapter 2. Strauss's terminology somewhat hides this, because he speaks of, with regard to Romanticism, he speaks of the historical approach, or historicism. And with regard to the Enlightenment, he speaks of the fact-value distinction. But of course, everyone knows that historicism is a main characteristic of romanticism, romantic philosophy, and the fact-value distinction, also called scientism or positivism, is a core characteristic of Enlightenment thinking. I'll get back to that. Now, just to give you an overview to begin with, chapters 3 and 4, that constitute the heart of the book, are a description of the essence of the tradition. Now, Strauss speaks in that regard of classic natural rights. But when you read it, you will see that the focus is on Plato, and to a lesser extent on Aristotle, mainly on Plato. Christianity is only sketched. It is clear that for Strauss, Christianity is sort of less important, more superficial or vulgar. Variety of Platonic philosophy. He agrees, I would say, in that respect with Nietzsche, that Christianity is Plato fürs Volk, Plato for the past. So the last two chapters, 6 and 7, are historical in the sense that they deal respectively with the origins of the Enlightenment. He discusses mainly Hobbes and Locke, and the origins of Romanticism, and he discusses mainly Rousseau and Burke. Okay. The Enlightenment is also called by Hobbes, sorry, by Strauss, modern natural right, and Romanticism is discussed under the title "The Crisis of Modern Natural Right." I'll explain later. So first, let's go into the Enlightenment. Okay, and can only sort of sketch the most essential things of the book. I have to say, let me just, an anecdote. I first read the book in 1984 when I was 25 or so. No, 22. And I didn't understand anything. But now that I am much older, much older, I've read it several times. I consider this to be the best single description of Western political thought from its beginnings to its very end. So I think that here we simply have the best history of political ideas ever produced. Having said that, let's continue with the Enlightenment. Now, the Enlightenment basically consists of two theses. It has two elements. First of all, there is a very fundamental belief in freedom and equality. Freedom and equality, liberty and equality. As the basic values, basic norms. Freedom and equality are the natural right of man. Right? And later, of course, developed into the whole list of human rights. But then, as a second element of the Enlightenment, we have the belief in intellectual and moral progress. Like history's going like this. And our means to this progress is reason or knowledge. And the highest form of knowledge is science. Right? So what you could call Enlightenment thinking scientism, in the sense that it's faith in science, belief in science. Not for nothing did Voltaire once declare that Locke, who was sort of the pope of everyone who believes in liberty and equality, and Newton, who is the pope of modern science, were the two greatest people that have ever lived. Newton and Locke, John Locke, right? So, and well, you here see that this. We live in 2019. If you ask anyone on the street, not even academics, just anyone on the street. So what are the two most important values? They will say freedom and equality. And so what about history? Like, was the past better than the present, or is the present better than the past? And what about the future? They will say, no, the past was worse than the present, and the future will be even better. And why will it be better? Well, because of science. We will know more, right? So we will be able to improve the world even more. This is our civic religion. This is our civic religion. It's the Enlightenment view of the world. Now, Strauss points out that there is a problem here. And the problem has to do with the fact that these two elements do not go together. There's an inherent contradiction here. And he discusses that on the basis of a very interesting work I often do with my students, Wissenschaft als Beruf, the famous Weber speech from 1999, immediately after the First World War.
Political policy.
Is it translated?
Yeah,
Yeah,
of course.
So where this theme is really acutely put forward, right? So what does Weber say? He says, well, you know, science, of course, cannot ground morality in any way. So the rise of scientism has undermined all belief in morality. Hence, the Entzauberung der Welt, the disenchantment of the world. And so for Weber it's very clear, and probably because of his depression, lifelong depression, that nihilism is the inherent consequence of the Enlightenment. Now, yeah, I love this text because it really puts forward the problem. And of course, Weber, as a positivist, is incapable of transcending his positivism and saying, well, you know, there must be something else. No, he's a positivist, he's a scientist. Well, this is all there is. This is all there is. We have to live with it. What exactly is the argument? Let me go a little bit deeper into that because it's so important. Science gives a factual account of the world. At least that's the aim of science, right? No values, facts. Now, if science is the only true account of the world, as the Enlightenment maintains, and as most scientists believe, the world consists merely of facts. The world is a factual whole. Facts can be put, facts are recognized therein that they can be put into so-called is statements, right? The table is brown, whatever. Now, where does this leave ought statements, moral statements, normative statements? Ought statements, as you know, are moral norms. Like this ought to be like this, ought to be like. Well, these are not part of the world in the way facts are. Facts are objective, norms are merely subjective. They are unscientific. That was the conclusion Weber came to, and it is the unavoidable conclusion of any Enlightenment thinking. But it was never it was never really, in the 17th or 18th century, it was never really seen in the way Weber saw it, as a real problem. Because it was always combined with sort of a happy belief still in liberty and equality. Take any philosopher of the 18th century, they will say, well, of course, science, like Condorcet, for instance, his famous book on the tableau historique des progrès d'esprit humain. Condorcet, yeah. So you will find together this belief that we will improve enormously, endlessly on the basis of science, and at the same time everyone is free and equal. So here the problem is still invisible. Condorcet has not seen the problem. In Weber is so interesting because he sees the problem. He sees that, yes, science might be great, the best way to know the world, but it also implies moral nihilism. Hence, freedom and equality are also freedom. If all moral norms are subjectivistic, freedom and equality are also subjectivistic. They have no special status. Now that's what Weber calls the Entzauberung der Welt. Of course, if you compare this to the traditional religion, traditional philosophy, Plato, gave us the conviction that there are norms or values inherent in reality. That's precisely the meaning of natural right. But, says Weber, We have since learned that that is not true. Good and evil do not exist objectively. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, that position is nihilism. That position is nihilism. Again, Weber's speech was from 1919. Weber was a Kantian. Speech from 1919. Strauss was 19 years old at the time, or 20 years old at the time. Okay, now let's turn to the second variety of modernity, namely historicism or romanticism. As you know, historicism is the idea that every period in history is unique and not comparable to any other. Ranke's expression is famous: jede Epoche ist unmittelbar zu Gott. Jede Epoche is every epoch, every era is immediate to God. So that it's not that you can compare eras and say this one is better, is closer to God, is better than that era. No, they're all different and they're all in their way good. So the basic metaphysical idea of romanticism or historicism is unicity, Einzigartigkeit. Unicity in time, historicism, but also unicity in space. Unicity in space. Let me give you as an example Savigny, von Savigny, von Beruf unserer Zeit zur Rechtswissenschaft. Von Savigny says, well, you know, about this Code Civil and this Code Penal, Napoleonic Code Civil, Code Penal. Well, the French think that it's universal law. It's good for everyone. But that is not true. French law is good for the French, but not good for the Germans, because the Germans are Germans, they're not French. So the Germans have to have German law, not French law. So that's called cultural relativism, right? Cultural relativism is sort of historicism. What historicism is through time, diachronically, is cultural relativism through space. Spatially. Now this whole, whether we call it romanticism or historicism or cultural relativism, originated, as you know, in Germany as a response to Enlightenment universalism. Right? Liberty, equality, science, good for everyone. And many scholars write books still about the discussion between Enlightenment and Romanticism. And also on the streets we have this discussion, right? My own colleagues, I'm in the Faculty of Law as a professor of legal philosophy. My own colleagues who do human rights are, most of them are universalists. Right? Human rights are a concrete codification of liberty and equality. And they truly believe that this is universal. So in Serbia, where they don't really recognize human rights, we have to go there, spend money, and maybe reconquer Serbia, and then we will establish the empire of freedom and equality, right? And also we have to set up universities, like the Middle European University, and then eventually people will also start to believe in what is true and correct, namely freedom and equality. This is the universalism, Enlightenment universalism present. My university, your university, everywhere. But there's also always colleagues who say, well, but no, this is not universal. This is Western imperialism. Now these colleagues are romantics. They are cultural relativists. No, this is not universal. This is imperial, colonial. So we have this discussion everywhere, not only in the West but also in the East. And the discussion is largely held so in terms of Enlightenment versus Romanticism. Who is right? Now what does Strauss say? They are both wrong. They're both wrong. Strauss points out that in a very fundamental way they are alike. They are not opposite, but they are alike. Because they both lead to nihilism. They are both nihilistic. Right? Departing from the fact-value distinction and saying, well, the world consists of facts, merely facts. That leaves values in a vacuum. Turns them into something subjective, unscientific. That's the Enlightenment way to nihilism. But there is also a romantic way to nihilism. If you say, well, okay, what's good and bad for the French is not good and bad for the Germans, it's not good and bad for the Serbians or the Dutch, you have relativism. There is no absolute good and bad. There are no absolute values. Everything's relative. And then you can continue and say, well, what's good and bad for you is not good and bad for me, because we are different. We are unique. You get an extreme kind of nihilism. It's not only different between cultures, but it's different between individuals. If you tell me, well, you can't do that because it's wrong. It's wrong for you, but not for me. I'm different from you. You find that extreme nihilism, for instance, in Joshua Mill, in his book, famous book on liberty, which is more or less the Bible of modern liberalism. So Strauss says they are both forms of nihilism. They are both forms of nihilism. So modernity, in essence, is nihilistic. Whether you come to modernity via the Romantics or via the Enlightenment, it's nihilistic. There's no way to ground good and evil, good and bad, morality. Now then, right? Clear?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Now then, of course the question is that so bad? Maybe it's a good thing, right? And this is a position often taken, of course, in our day, but it was also taken already after the war, during the war, by a man called Hans Kelsen, one of the other refugees from Europe, also Jewish, from Austria. If you're in political science department, you might not be very well acquainted with him, but when you're in the law department, you really have to be, because he is the pope of modern legal positivism. So, what does Kelsen say? Kelsen wrote because it's not only a legal scholar, he's also a political philosopher. Well, his most important book in political philosophy is called What is Justice? Very interesting book. If you want to read a real defense of positivism, that's the book you have to read. So what does Kelsen say? Yes, modernity is subjectivistic, relativistic. If you want to call it nihilistic, fine with me. But subjectivism, relativism is good, because it leads to modesty and tolerance, and hence to democracy and the rule of law. It's a very interesting argument. Okay, the argument is, well, I know that there are no absolute values, and you know that too. So everyone knows that there are no absolute values. So that means that we can do nothing else but respect each other's values, right? You think differently from me, but I think differently. And there's no real truth, so we have to respect each other. Tolerance, democracy, rule of law. That's Kelsen's argument. And there is something to that. And to the contrary, Kelsen argues, moral absolutism leads to repression in the police state. Right? Look at the Nazis, look at the communists. They were so sure about themselves, they had the truth, the big T. Pravda, right? So what you see where that leads to. Pravda, if you know the truth and someone says, but I don't believe that, well, you should be put in a camp, re-education camp. So you get a police. Well, there's logic in this argument. It's not stupid. Nevertheless, Strauss says, and I agree, it's superficial. Superficial. And that can easily be seen. You know why? Well, this modesty and tolerance and democracy and rule of law are themselves values and regarded by all decent liberals as absolute values. Now let's be more drastic and think through the end point of relativism. The end point of relativism. Now, once you believe that moral norms are merely subjective preferences, once you really believe that, right, you also believe that democracy and rule of law, etc., liberty and equality are merely subjective preferences. And then you won't be so tolerant. You will say, well, if all morality is subjective preference, everyone acts merely out of his own interest, right? That's the truth. Everyone acts according to his own fancy. So why don't I act according to my own fancy? Try to become the strongest, try to set up a tyranny, then I can do whatever I want. Fuck moral values. Moreover, when you are a positivist, but still a decent positivist, you no longer have an intellectual defense against people arguing in this tyrannical way. Suppose it's 1933 and you have a new man on the throne, right? A new Chancellor, Reichskanzler, and well, he has different values from the Chancellor before that. But you are a positivist. There is no grounding of any values. So these values are different values. And of course you are an Untertan. So you have to obey the government. And you will obey the government. Because this is just a different law. It's different than a formal law, but you can't say it's wrong, it's evil. Because there is no wrong and evil. Hence, positivism leads to tyranny. First of all, to people thinking that, well, why don't I try to be to determine everything so that I can realize my own interest and my own fancy. There's no reason not to do that, but it also leads to destruction of moral fiber, of moral spine among all those who will be the victims of tyranny. Now, it's this double effect of relativism, subjectivism, nihilism, that lies behind totalitarianism, says Strauss. So totalitarianism is really the effect of the nihilism that is the result of the Enlightenment and Romanticism. In other words, totalitarianism is the outcome, causally determined, it's a necessary outcome of modernity, of Enlightenment thinking and Romanticism. Modernity has two lanes, as I said, Enlightenment and Romanticism, but both lead to the same dead end. Now, I'm almost finished. Not entirely, because I have to say the most important things about the tradition, of course. But before I do that, let me ask, on behalf of you, I think, let me ask Strauss a question. Okay, Strauss, I think you have a point, but and of course, we all see that behind totalitarianism in its dual manifestations, there is romanticism. It's very clear, and like Hitler was a romantic, but Marx was a romantic too, right? Communism is the Aufhebung of alienation. It's very romantic thought. And there is also the Enlightenment, of course, behind totalitarianism. If only in the technology, right? So the trains and the gas chambers, etc., etc. Horkheimer and Adorno wrote an interesting book about that, the dialectics of yes, dialectics. Yeah, Ireland writes about it, Heidegger writes about it, etc. But Strauss, I have a question on behalf of you. Okay. Isn't it true that we now have devised a way out, namely liberal democracy, as as the Americans have done, and as the Western Europeans have done after the war? That seems to be a viable and a good form of modernity, right? So to speak, a third way, not Nazism, not communism, no, liberal democracy. That's very modern, but it's working and it's nice. So Strauss, what would you say about that? Now Strauss was sort of in an awkward position, of course, because he went to America and he was well received there, became a full professor in Chicago, very respected university, and was always left free to do whatever he wanted, etc., etc. And he sort of, he was thankful to America, and justly so. So you will find in his works not like, you remember Solzhenitsyn's Harvard speech? You know it, Solzhenitsyn, right?
Yeah.
Well, read his Harvard speech. So Solzhenitsyn is invited by the Americans, and then what does he do? In his Harvard speech, he goes, bam, bam, bam. Like, you are about as bad as the Soviet Union. Very interesting speech, very interesting, and very true. So you have to read it. Now Strauss was not like that. But you will, if you know Strauss, you will see that he's very critical of the US, and hence by implication of modern Western Europe, which is sort of a copy of the US, and becoming more and more a copy of the US. He's very critical, and he's very pessimistic. Read, for instance, his speech, which is on the internet, Liberal Education in Mass Democracy. So Strauss believes that liberal democracy is doomed to fail, doomed to eventually turn into a form of totalitarianism. I think he's right. And he says, well, it still works. Like you see it, especially in the Western countries, it works. But why does it work? It's work because there still is a lot of rudimentary tradition there. Rudimentary tradition. There was an interesting lecture he gave on European nihilism, German nihilism. Towards the end of the lecture, he says, "Well, okay, the British. So why are the British? Why are the British not the same as the Nazis? Well, because they are modern, but they are not so stupid to forget the tradition. Look at Oxford and Cambridge. Like they are still traditional. There, the elite is educated, so the elite is traditional. They will keep alive the tradition." Well, I don't know if you've been to Oxford and Cambridge recently, but it's become a different matter. Anyway, so Strauss says liberal democracy functions as long as it still respects certain traditional values, which stabilizes liberal democracy, but which it cannot itself bring forth. You remember the Fukuyama book about social capital? What was the title?
The last one.
No, that was the first book. The second book. It's about social capital. I forgot the name. This is a sort of Fukuyama was a student of Bloom. Alan Bloom was one of the most important students of Strauss. So this is Alan Bloom. So this is this theory about liberal democracy being kept alive and well thanks to traditional values, which you find in Fukuyama, second book, comes from Strauss. Okay, so I think we can agree with it. But what has happened to these traditional values in the past? Well, for us in Western Europe, 15 years, and for you in the past 20 years or so. Add to that, and now comes a the Heideggerian element. Add to that, of course, so the liberal democracy leads in the end to an erosion of the tradition, i.e. to an erosion of Christianity. Christian founding of values. We have seen that. We see that. We live that, right? And liberal democracy leads to an erosion of classical philosophy, Plato and Aristotle. I still, as a young man, went to classical gymnasium, although it was, I had 6 or 7 hours a week in Latin every week. Now, my 20 years before, they had 10 hours a week in Latin every week. Now, my son, just a couple of years ago, finished gymnasium. He had, I don't know, he stopped with Greek and he had 2 hours of Latin each week. So, the gymnasium is not a gymnasium. You have to know that the whole Western elite for the past 1,000 years was not just educated on Sunday in church, but also throughout the week emerged into Plato and Aristotle, often via Cicero, but Cicero is Platonist. Now, all that is destroyed, especially in the last 20 or 30 years. It's destroyed, it's gone. And these two, argues Strauss, and I think he's correct, provide the moral basis also of liberal democracy. So remaining Christian and Greek values, Platonic values. Now add to that modern technology, the child of the Enlightenment, and one can conclude the incredible, beautiful possibilities of any future tyrant. Like, if we are going to have tyranny, it's going to be the best tyranny ever. The most effective and efficient tyranny ever.
Enhanced, the most enhanced.
The most enhanced, with cameras everywhere, etc. So, the future, and Strauss has several pieces, he keeps returning to the problem of technology. So the future does not look bright. The future does not look bright. Now the only way out is a return to the tradition, i.e. to what he calls classic natural rights. That i.e. a consciousness of certain absolute moral norms and values. Which brings me finally, and I will keep it short, I promise you, to the central chapter 4 of Natural Right and History, which is called Classic Natural Right. Now, those of you who have a Catholic background, what about natural right, lex naturalis, in Orthodox tradition?
It's Platonic.
It's purely Platonic. Yes. Good, very good. Now, for those of us who come from the Catholic tradition, natural right is always, you think of Thomas Aquinas and you have a certain picture of it. Now, that is not the picture Strauss sketching of natural right. He says, well, the Thomistic thing is okay, but it's sort of superficial. You have to go back to Plato. So for him, natural right is Plato. It's in essence Plato's psychology, ethics, and political philosophy, and metaphysics, of course, which is below all of them. And Strauss would argue, I think correctly, that this Platonic philosophy as a whole was followed more or less by Aristotle, Augustine, and Aquinas. All of them are Platonists of a certain kind. So let's focus on Plato, and let me put in my own words what Strauss has to say about Plato. I'm reducing very much to one side, but I've been talking too long anyway. So, we have to start with anthropology. Man, as he naturally is a desiring animal. The epithumii, the desires, the libidines, the voluptates rule in his soul. He is the slave of his desires. And most of these desires are not altruistic, but rather egoistic. Also, his desires are unlimited, contrary, of course, to the desires of all other animals. Like the desires of lions or chickens are very limited. So the humankind is unique in the sense that his desires, or its desires, are unlimited. When one desire is fulfilled, there's two other desires taking its place. Hence, great scarcity. Right? The desire is the desire for something. Now, if the desires are endless and they never stop, well, the stuff that can fulfill the desires is limited. Because the world is limited. The world of stuff is limited. So there is great scarcity. And we see that in human society, more than in animal society, where there's also scarcity, but relatively much less than in human society. Right? In the society of lions, there is no scarcity of oil. On the contrary, if they smell it somewhere, they run away. So, great scarcity, hence fights, theft, fraud, murder, war. It's the beginning of the Totalitarian. No one wants that. Hence, we need policemen / soldiers to establish and to keep the peace. And nota bene, this is Plato. This is not Hobbes. But as you see, the starting point of Hobbes and Plato is identical. Hobbes starts in exactly the same way. But from this point onwards, they diverge. Because Hobbes stops here with, well, Hobbes said we need policemen, soldiers to keep the peace, right? And that's the sovereign, that's the absolute state. Now, for Plato, this is the beginning of his thinking. Because from there on, he focuses on these soldiers, policemen. He calls them guardians, as you know, phylakes. These are also men, and they have human nature, hence they are also after their egoistic desires. Now, if we give these phylakes the means to enforce peace and order, namely weapons, who is going to prevent them from pointing these weapons at us? Because, isn't that the easiest way for them to profit? Hence you get tyranny. So I always call this the elite problem. Every society needs an elite, and every society has an elite, however democratic it is. Right? You can say Holland is very democratic, but you have to go. You can say Holland is very democratic, everyone's equal. Yes, but we only have 200 politicians, and 50 top civil servants, and 10 top militaries, and they determine. They are the rulers. So every society needs an elite, every society has an elite, but usually it's a bad elite. Because they consist of normal people, hence they have endless egoistic desires. Hence they oppress the people. Well, look outside. Look at history. So what do we do about the elite problem? It's a basic political problem in Plato. There is always an elite. As long as the elite consists of normal people, it will oppress us. Because they're after their own egoistic desires. So what do we do about this? Well, there are several modern authors after Hobbes who were aware of this problem, right? Like Locke and Montesquieu and the Federalist Papers, etc., etc. Now what's their answer? They say, well, control the elite. Checks on the elite. Checks and balances. Separation of powers, etc., etc. But of course, Plato had thought of that and had argued that that doesn't suffice. Because quis custodiet ipsus custodiet. Who guards the guardians? Well, here. They can work together, and they can be lazy, and whatever. So control is not the ultimate answer. No, the ultimate answer is, there's only one ultimate answer. What is needed is an inner check in the souls of the members of the elite. An inner transformation. Periagoge, that's Plato's word. The Christian word is metanoia. And you Orthodox have yet another word. I learned it yesterday.
No, it's not really like ησυχάζω.
Ησυχάζω. Well, I have to look it up, but it's something like So what we need is this metanoia, this periagoge, in the sense that these rulers which we have, which are unavoidable, have to rule not in their own interest, which means that they should no longer be ruled by their desires. They should no longer be ruled by their desires. So, suppose you agree with it. Now, we are not talking about the practical realizability of this, right? We're just talking about what is needed, not whether it is possible to bring it into effect. So if the idea is we have to have rulers who are not governed by their desires, who are in a sense superhuman, no longer human. So how do we, if you want it, how do you bring that about? Well, first of all, they need to have the willpower, the thumos, to keep the desires in check, to keep the epithumia in check. And then, secondly, they have to have the practical wisdom, phonesis, Sophia also in Plato, to know what to do in the general interest, in the interest of the whole, the bonum communem. So we have here the two basic values, right? So Fossune and phonesis. Now, and I'm following Strauss here. Who follows Plato? Such a society in which the wise rule, the wise and the willpower rule, is called an aristocracy. Aristocracy, rule of the best. So what we need is not democracy, but aristocracy. How can we get aristocracy? Well, there's only one way: education. That is moral education. Only then, and then the politeia goes on and on. Only then do we get peace and order in society, i.e. happiness. And then Plato's ends is, as long as this isn't successfully done, there's no end to the suffering of mankind. Because you haven't solved the elite problem. So you are going to be oppressed and maybe even killed. Now, almost done. This education for metanoia, what exactly does it mean? What exactly does it mean? And here we come to the core of the psychology or the anthropology of natural right in the Platonic Straussian sense. So this was the political theory, now we get to the anthropology which lies at the base of it. Look at the original normal state of the soul of man. It's driven by desires. The two other elements of the soul, namely the willing power, so to speak, and reason, the logos, are put in the service of his desires, right? So you have a desire and a desire, and then you want to realize it. So what you need to realize your desire? Well, first of all, willpower, like you have to do it, you have to put it into practice, and then of course you have to think about how you are going to do it. If you don't think, you do strange things, but you do not realize your desire. Now what has to happen is a periagoge. That is to say, turning around, flipping upside down of the soul. What leads has to obey, and what obeys has to lead. So reason and willpower, which are at the bottom and which obey the desires, they have to be put on top. Reason has to lead, assisted by willpower, thumos, to control the desires. If that is the case, peace and order in the soul, and hence, if this is the case in the soul of the elite, peace and order in society. How do we call such a soul in which the best part rules the rest? It's an aristocratic soul. So what we need, and herewith I end my presentation, what we need, according to Strauss, following Plato, is aristocracy in the soul and in society. Now, if he talks about America, for instance, he says, well, America is still functioning quite well, because we have sort of gentlemanly tradition here, more or less an aristocratic tradition here, and in Britain as well, of course. It was originally British, which still exists, and which is a countervailing power to democracy. As long as we have that gentlemanly tradition, that aristocratic tradition, things will be fine in the world democracy.
House of Lords.
For instance, the House of Lords, but all in, it's everywhere. Cambridge. And these people were educated in aristocratic tradition. They were in journalism, and they were also in entrepreneurship. Okay. So his, and then I'm going to stop. His point is, we need aristocracy in the soul and in society. That's the essence of natural rights. Now compare that to where we are now. It's good to focus our thoughts. We've always had aristocracy. Aristocracy is at the basis of every cultural achievement of the West. Christianity was aristocratic. And every poetry, every literature, every art, the universities, you name it. The basis is aristocracy. Now, if there's one thing we killed after the war, it's aristocracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to let the audience ask questions. Please. Just introduce say your name and
aristocracy proposition. Is it feasible in a globalized world, taking into account the fact that there are various and contradicting definitions of the sage? I mean, this kind of relativism.
Yeah.
According to the Stoics, the sage is a totally different thing that the sage for Epicure or the sage for Plato. So, is it functional?
The saints, no.
The saints.
The sage, the wise one.
Oh, the sage, okay.
Is it functional in a global state, or would it reduce that the applicability of such a concept to local societies and localized communities?
Preserve objectivity of moral values in such a dynamic world. Correct.
Are you asking about the? You are asking about the practical, not the theoretical, but practical possibility of, because we agree probably on Platonism. Are you asking my opinion or Strauss's opinion? Listen, it's like Strauss is in a very deep sense modern. And you have to understand it correctly. He believes Platonism is best, and he believes Platonism is what we need, but he's never entirely sure that it is true. Let me quote you a sentence from the very interesting introduction of natural art history. Certainly, the inescapable practical consequences of nihilism is fanatical obscurantism. The harsh experience of this consequence has led to renewed general interest in natural life. This book is written in '53. The harsh experience of this consequence, fanatical obscurantism, refers to Nazism, right, in the first place, and communism in the second place. This has led to renewed general interest in natural right. We are talking about the natural right renaissance of the 1950s, especially in Europe. Right? It died out in the 1960s and almost everyone has forgotten it. But there was a real renewed interest in natural right, especially in Germany in the 50s. So, and he says that's fine, we have to rethink natural right, but certainly the seriousness of the need of natural right, we need natural right, does not prove that the need can be satisfied. A need is not a wish is not a fact. Now, throughout his mature work, there is almost a fear in Strauss, almost a fear, and maybe it's a healthy fear, that Weber and people like that might after all have been right. Do I express myself clearly? It's not a wish that Weber is right, well, oh, you know, it's a factual world, there's no values, no, it's a fear that he is right. Because Strauss is convinced, as I am and you probably are, that we need these absolute groundings. So the answer is it the answer to your question? Is it possible? I'm not entirely sure. I certainly hope so. I live between hope and fear, like Strauss. I live between hope and fear. With all my heart and my mind, I do hope so. I do nothing else than write about it and think about it. But I'm not sure if it's possible. You know what Heidegger said at some point in this Spiegel interview, after his death. Heidegger said, "Nur ein Gott kann uns retten," which is rather fatalistic. It's tragic. We don't know. Well, you know, we live 70 years, 80 years maximum. So what can we do? All we can do is fight. We don't know where this is leading. We shouldn't be overly optimistic. There's much ground for pessimism, extreme pessimism. But that's not a reason to lie in your bed and never get up anymore. This is all we can do. Guarantee of success? No. No.
Maybe there are probably no guarantees for failure.
Why don't you come here? Why don't you come here?
Yeah, but he has the problem with
Yes, well, then I'm saying, why don't you come here? I understand you.
If the only way out is aristocracy.
Yes.
I am a Greek guy, you're a Dutch guy,
Yeah.
and the other guys are Serbians, and sometimes we have to select the wisest guys to govern, to make decisions for us.
Yeah.
Concerning the European Union in the context of European Union.
Yeah.
But we have different views on who is the wisest guy to, because
Yes.
this cultural relativism drives us to more
Yeah.
relativism.
True.
That's why I'm pessimistic.
Well, only wise people know wise people. What is the possibility of a democratic electorate electing wise rulers, wise leaders, as we say nowadays? It's very small, but sometimes it happens.
Are there any other questions?
Yes. So just a very quick, you said you're a professor at the Faculty of Law.
Yes.
From the,
Someone is from...
yeah, I'm a lawyer, so
Good.
a question that really remained in my mind during my education. We have philosophy of law that is called Introduction to Law at the first year of the law faculty. So what would you say, and what Mr. Strauss would say, on the crucial argument of legal positivism,
Yeah.
that once you have a written norm, it's understandable for everyone, and it's easy to implement and interpret because it's written, and it says, for example, if you kill someone, 20 years of prison.
Yeah.
While the natural rights can be for him and for me, very different in terms of the crucial substance.
Yeah.
What would you say for that?
Well,
They're basically relative, even though they don't want to be relative. They are relative.
well, this aspect of positivism is very simply counters. It fails on the aspect of interpretation, the analytical aspect. Contrary to what most people believe, there are no unequivocal words. And writings do not make things clearer. As every lawyer knows, because you earn your bread with it, we have a law which consists of sentences, words, making up sentences. But yes, these sentences have to be interpreted. And you can give different interpretations. That's how you earn your bread. Right? So you have a fight amongst lawyers, advocates and judges on the right interpretation of written words. So the written law is, contrary to appearances, not clearer than the unwritten law. It's not, bullshit. And so this has become absolutely clear, even at the beginning of the 20th century. That the 19th century belief in Napoleonic, essentially, as the Enlightenment belief in written codexes as clearer than unwritten law clearly turns out to be nonsense.
So what happens to you students when you say that during a lecture? Do they leave the faculty of law and say this is bullshit, like studying the law? Or do they try to make better laws to be more understandable? And
no, in fact, the situation is now in Holland as in America that lawyers do not take seriously the law. Which is itself is a problem, but so what do you do as a lawyer? Well, you are trained as a rhetorician to interpret the law according to your own interest.
Ambitious.
That's positivism. So that's the instrumentalism, right? That's the perspective you get at the law faculty.
but it's so relative. Like when you say,
Well, that's the perspective. That's the perspective. So you want to be a lawyer? Okay. That you want to earn a lot of money? You have to serve your client. So we teach you
how to squeeze.
to squeeze the words of the law so that you will win in court. And also, if you look at the case law of the Supreme Court or any other court, the case law is interpretation of the written statutes. And what we see in, like for instance in England and America, they have stare decisis, so the president tells president. Well, on the continent we don't have that. I don't know the situation in Serbia, but
We're Roman law tradition.
good. But so it's for judges. It's very simple to overturn older case law. If they think, well, this is not right, let's do something else, and we'll overturn it. And you see that tendency now in Britain and in America as well.
Yeah, but that's why we have bylaws and regulations and under-regulations.
No, but the last word is always the judge.
Of course.
And he can always say, well, this word means that.
Which is happening with the 14th Amendment, actually. Equality,
Fifth Amendment,
and also in America with that.
So, absolutely. The American Constitution no longer means what it meant to the founding fathers.
Yeah, of course.
It's totally different.
Adapt to the
Totally different
evolution of society.
Yeah, that's very dubious where we put it,
So just finally, if I may, in which way then natural rights would be an answer to all the negative conclusions that you made answering to my question?
Well, Strauss is not talking about natural rights. Natural rights is a modern natural right. It's an invention of Hobbes and especially Locke. Now, Strauss is against modern natural right. He is in favor of classic natural right. If you read Plato or Aristotle or any of the medievals, they never talk about natural rights, or almost never talk about natural rights. So if you want to, they talk about virtues and about duties. They talk about virtues and about duties, especially about virtues. And they would say, well, to make this very complicated argument very simple, to lead a good life as an individual and a society, we need virtues, especially certain virtues. There's no way around. And let me give them to you, and then you can think through whether this is true or not. So first of all, we need wisdom, practical wisdom. If you have no practical wisdom, you make a mess of your life, both in politics and as an individual. Right? No, and wisdom is not like knowing much or being very intelligent. There are many intelligent people who have
Applicative aspect.
Francis or Sophia, being a wise man is not an intelligent man. It's not the same. But you understand that. It's still a little bit in our tradition. Then you have to be courageous. Courageous. You have to be moderate. You have to be moderate your desires. And then finally you have to be just. That is to say, if this is his, don't take it. Because you get into a fight. And you cannot establish a society without meum and tuum, respect for meum and tuum. The whole law is based on that. Right? Criminal law and civil law. That's sort of an elaboration of the basic notion of justice. So these four things. Everything hinges in the individual life and in the collective life on these four things. Now, I think it's impossible to deny that. It's not subjective. Anyone who thinks a little bit about this knows this is the way we educate our children. This is the way we try to behave ourselves. If we do not behave in this way, we either die very quickly or become unhappy. So this is natural right. It's not the Ten Amendments. No, that's modern natural right. That's the Universal Declaration of Natural Rights. That's modern natural law, and that's a failure. It leads precisely what you say. It leads precisely, according to Strauss, to the crisis of natural rights, in the sense that you like someone like Locke says, well, these are the natural rights, or the founding fathers say, well, you know, the Bill of Rights. Someone else says, will say, well, but why not more? Why not something else? So this thinking in terms of natural rights, modern natural rights, necessarily leads to a relativization of natural rights and the historization. And that's relativism and nihilism.
So they have to be internalized, that's what you're arguing.
Not the rights, the virtues.
The virtues, yeah.
Forget rights. Forget rights.
Thank you very much for your answer and for a very clear presentation of everything you said. Thanks.
Thank you.
Before giving floor to Misha, because I know you have a lot of questions, I have one short question, and that is, before that, just a thing, you said that I didn't know that Voltaire thought that Newton and Locke are the most important people ever born, and I found, while doing my PhD, a short letter of Thomas Jefferson to a priest, Protestant priest in Paris, and he said that it is Newton, Locke, and Francis Bacon. All three are British, by the way, English. But the question I wanted to pose is, if Strauss thought that modernity necessarily leads to nihilism, would he agree with the statement, in your opinion, that today's black flag of ISIS and the rainbow flag of the let's say, end of human being as we know it today through this whole gender relativization revolution are actually two different paths, but a logical conclusion of Enlightenment and French Revolution?
Well, as to the rainbow flag, that's certainly true, but about ISIS, I'm not sure.
I also think it's, in my view, it's also nihilism. It neglects the life of others and the life of the perpetrator themselves. Because when you read the interviews of the jihadis, they always are saying how they're envious of their friends who have found shahada, who have died in battle. So death is a goal in itself. It is death to others and death to the world, death to the perpetrator who is spreading death at the same time.
I'm not quite sure, but you know.
It reminds me of the Jacobins in a way, not even a more extreme version of.
But ISIS is not atheist, and it's sort of a primitive Protestant, quasi-Protestant form of religion, religious belief. And of course, at the basis of this belief are absolute values. So in that sense, it's not modern. Of course, there are modern aspects to it, like technology, internet, modern methods, etc., etc. Yeah, of course. But I think basically it's not modern. Whereas the rainbow and everything that's connected with it is ultra-modern in the sense that it wants to transcend the last vestiges of nature. So it wants to destroy natural right. Natural right, the right of nature. The right of nature, and it's also a virtue. It wants to transcend nature by technology, which is inherent in Enlightenment thinking. It's just a consequence of Enlightenment. Also, the other way around. Gay marriage is it's simply an application of the Enlightenment principles of freedom and equality. Right? We are all equal, so why make a distinction? And we all need to be free to be able to marry. Like, love is love, right? So whether it's between a man and a woman, or between two men, or between two women. It's no, but that's you as a liberal. Let me defend the liberals here. Now, as a liberal, I could say, well, but an animal, liberty and equality are also about expressing your wish. Animals cannot express their wish, so it's limited to human beings and then adults of some age. But then everything that adults want to do together on a voluntary basis is an elaboration of an application of the principle of freedom and equality. It's very simple. So there is no escaping gay marriage, as there is also no escaping polygamy in the future. We will have polygamy. Like if I go, if let's say if 4 women want to marry with me, I'm happy, they are happy. So they decide out of their own will. From the perspective of liberty and equality, there's nothing against it. So this will come. This will come. It's certain that this will come. And also, if I want to change whatever my sex or my appearances or whatever, if I want it, and technology makes it possible, it's my liberty. I can do what I want. So this will come. This will come. If I want to change the genetic makeup of my children, this will come. I will give the doctor a bit of sperm, and then he will and maybe also the egg of my wife, and then we have perfect children. It's my wish. Like, I don't harm anyone else, freedom and equality. So, as long as we believe in modernity, all of this will follow. Necessarily.
But then this implies that modernity is a sort of religion after all.
Yeah, that's what I said. You can say many bad things about liberty and equality, but there's one good thing to say about liberty and equality. They are still absolute values. Wait till the moment comes that we no longer believe in values at all. What happens then? Then all that is left is pure self-interest. So the reign of the stronger. That's what you get. Do you know the Melian dialogue? Thucydides, the Melian dialogue? The Athenians were there, right? So they invaded Melia. What was the name of the other? Melos. Sorry, Melos. It's to the south of Athens. And the Melians started to talk about justice and things like that. They said, well, what are you talking about justice? We are strong, you are weak. So we are going to kill you.
I had the chance, of course, to listen to the lecture yesterday, and we spoke yesterday about came to the end of the importance of the hierarchy. actually, yesterday when Andreas was presenting the idea of, let me say, conservative or traditional approach to understanding of the, let me say, cosmology, anthropology, and everything, we came to the crucial importance of the hierarchy. And that is actually how you decide what is good and what is bad. It's crucial that you have to have some, let me say, relatively objective stance. Otherwise, you don't choose. How do you choose what is good or bad or whatsoever? So in that sense, it's really forcing us to think about how to, what also our colleague Evangelos asked, in this world where everything is starting to be dynamic, relativized, how to preserve some you know, stances for...
That's typical for conservatism. But now Strauss, we often go to conferences together, and then you see conservatives always say this. But then the question is, well, so what values? Where do we find them? Do we have to create them out of ourselves or what? Now that's sort of the pitfall of conservatism. What Strauss says, and I agree wholeheartedly, is that we have to return to the great tradition of philosophy and theology. And we have to really rethink our tradition because there is truth there. And I know, you think, well, no, that's good. Start study the Christian tradition and especially Plato.
Yeah, but actually I had several things, but I will try to focus on one specific issue. And speaking about Strauss, there's so many interesting things. For example, his connection and relationship with Carl Schmitt, which is extremely interesting and so on. But I would like to focus on one thing. At one moment you said actually that, and actually that was one of the pillars of your presentation, that actually subjectivity somehow is necessary, let me say, consequence of enlightenment in some way. But again, of course, enlightenment, the whole philosophy of enlightenment is rather complex. You could find different aspects as well. But actually, somehow I get to think Condorcet, for example, or people like him, or even Leibniz in some way, in which he was, you know, enlightenment philosopher and so on. Many of them thought about actually that there is some objective reality, that subjectivity is not necessary, that they were actually blessed, unlike traditional people, to see real reality or necessary reality in the future. So why I'm asking this, you know, because that's my question basically. I found, or I'd like to hear you upon that this misconception or misunderstanding of what Strauss thought and how he saw objectivity somehow was the reason why we had so much speech about, you know, Strauss as inspirer of neocons. Actually, I think that neocons are much closer to, let me say, this objectivistic idea of enlightenment somehow. Actually, when you take a look about the idea of Wolfowitz, it says we have the duty to promote democracy and human rights all the way around. Yeah. I don't see that this is connected very much with Leo Strauss. It's much more with the traditional enlightenment. I would like you to comment upon that, please.
Yeah, I will keep it short.
Yeah.
I don't know. The younger people here will not remember that, but under Bush had especially one minister for foreign affairs, I think, whose name was Wolfowitz. Yes, and Wolfowitz was a student of Alan Bloom, who was a student of Strauss. That was it. And there was also a lot of involvement of certain people who called themselves neoconservatives. The most important of whom is Bill Kristol. And that, according to the journalists who know nothing, of course, was an indication that there was some conspiracy. And mastermind of the conspirators was Leo Strauss. Is it total nonsense or just a little bit of nonsense? I would say it's mainly nonsense. And to explain that, I have to return to the nature of Straussianism. Straussianism, of course, is mainly an American thing. There are very few European Straussians. That is also due to the fact that Strauss never, although he got some offers to become professor in Germany after the war, never came to it, and he returned only once to Germany. So in Germany, Strauss is almost unknown. Very strange. He has no disciplines, unlike Voegelin, who went to München for a while, and there's a real Voegelinian school in Germany. There are no Straussians. So the Straussians are mainly Americans. Now, this weird thing about Americans, we as Europeans have to understand. The Americans are thoroughly, ruthlessly patriotic. They, all of them somehow believe that America is God's own country. City on a hill. There has never been a better country than America. And even the conservatives believe that. So, for them, it's very important that the few remarks Strauss makes about America are very important to them. Now, as I told you, he was very critical of modernity, but being a guest in America, he expressed this bit of subdued. A good reader understands that there is criticism of American plight as a form of modernity, which is not viable in the long run. Now, the American Straussians do not want to see that. Right? That's the problem here. The American Straussians say, well, you know, our master Strauss did like America, and he stayed there. So America is a good modernity. America is good modernity. Now, then you get, that's precisely the basic, the fundamental point of neoconservatism. The neoconservatives are on the side of modernity. They believe in modernity, they believe in capitalism, they believe in the American system. But they think it should be like the original system, end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century. And who spoils it? Well, the liberals and the socialists and the left. So that's neoconservatism, and which means return to the original principles of the American founding, like conceived in liberty and Declaration of Independence, things like that. So what they do is they put Strauss as a horse before their own cart. And in that respect, there is some truth to this remark that Strauss is the inspirator of this neoconservatism, but for anyone who really knows Strauss, it's clear that it's nonsense. Strauss would clearly have disagreed.
I think we agree. One more question.
Very short. I mean, is it true that Strauss sort of believed in Zionism at one point in his life with the Jabotinsky movement? Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. As like Arendt and many other Jewish Germans, and Austrian Germans, like Stefan Zweig, for instance. They became more Jewish. But let me put it this way: they became Jewish due to anti-Semitism. And then once you become Jewish, you have to think about the question: what does it mean to be Jewish? Does it mean is it something religious, or is it something ethnic? So do we need a state? So that's the background of the whole discussion and thinking about this.
Only tried committed suicide before enlightening his mind in
No,
42.
Yeah, most of them did not believe in Zionism. And Strauss didn't follow that path, although he was very sympathetic to Israel, right, as you can imagine. And neither did Arendt or did Zweig. Zweig, by the way, knew Herzl. You know, did you know his event from yesterday, the world of yesterday? Beautiful, beautiful autobiography. But they all essentially remained Europeans. That's important for us. When you become a Jew, I mean, theoretically, a Zionist or a religious Jew, you stand at a distance from us. But they remain Europeans. That is to say, traditional Europeans. Even Arendt, although rather modern, is also rather traditional. And that's why it's so funny to read all these leftists reading Arendt and understanding nothing of it.
I think we can conclude on this note, and thank you once again for
Yes.
Thank you very much.